My daughter's future father-in-law looked me straight in the eye and said, "When you're responsible for 280 people, you learn quickly who can keep up." Then he smiled like he was doing me a favor. For the next hour, Richard Carlisle explained Harrison Vale Controls to me, its operations, pressure, scale, without realizing I had bought the company 8 years earlier. I owned it through North Star Industrial Holdings. Every paycheck in that building traced back to a company I controlled. Leah and I had planned to reveal that after dinner. We even knew the moment, but as Richard kept talking, I changed my mind. Because by then, I wanted to see what else he would reveal first. Leah called me on a Sunday afternoon while I was making chili, and the moment I heard her voice, I knew something had changed. "Dad, are you sitting down?" she asked. I wasn't. I was standing at the stove with a spoon in one hand, watching onions disappear into a pot. I set it down anyway. "Evan proposed last night." For a second, the kitchen went quiet. Then she started laughing and told me how he had planned everything on the rooftop of his apartment, how the wind nearly carried the ring box away, how he forgot half the speech he had practiced. I asked the only question that mattered. "Are you happy?" "Dad, I'm really happy." She said it twice. Leah was our only child. I had spent 28 years pretending I understood that raising her meant eventually watching her build a life that didn't need me at the center of it. Knowing that, in theory, was easy. Hearing it happen was different. After we hung up, I stood there long enough for the onions to start burning. Evelyn walked in, looked at the stove, then at me. She said yes. I nodded. Evelyn smiled. Our girl, I said. Then, she asked why I looked like I'd lost something. The next morning, I called Leah and asked when we were meeting Evan's parents. I said it casually, like any father would. But I meant it. A marriage does not just join two people. It puts two families close enough to hear each other breathe. Evelyn understood that before I did. By April, she had already bought a dress for a dinner that would not happen until October. Dark green, simple neckline, sleeves to the wrist. She stood in our bedroom doorway holding it against herself and asked, "Does this look like I'm trying too hard?" I said, "It looks fine." She said, "Fine is exactly what I'm aiming for." I missed the warning in that. My wife had spent 27 years running a public school where parents measured her before they listened to her. She had already sensed the Carlyles were the kind of people who measured first. I offered to choose the restaurant. There was a small Italian place downtown where I had invested years earlier. Quiet enough to talk and good enough that nobody had to perform. But when I called Richard Carlisle, he laughed warmly and said, No, Tom, let me handle this one." He chose Barton and Ash, a steakhouse with white tablecloths and a valet stand. When he called back, he mentioned that getting a Thursday table there had taken some pull. Then he mentioned it again. What the Carlyles did not know was simple enough to fit on one line and heavy enough to change the whole dinner. I owned North Star Industrial Holdings, and North Star owned 4 operating companies across Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky: Precision Castings, Water Treatment Housings, Industrial Distribution, and Harrison Vale Controls. Together they employed 850 people. Harrison Vale alone sat on the west side of Indianapolis with 280 employees and a building long enough that you could walk for 6 minutes and still not reach the actuator cells. I had bought it 8 years earlier from a family that had run out of heirs who wanted grease under their nails. My name was not on the sign. That was deliberate. I buy companies, choose the right operators, and stay completely out of the way. Richard Carlisle worked there. Evan worked there. Leah worked there too, under her mother's last name, Monroe. Almost nobody connected her to me. 2 weeks before the dinner, Leah and I agreed to tell them after the main course. "Let them eat first," I said quietly. Then we would tell them who owned the room Richard kept trying to control. We arrived at Barton and Ash at 7, and the Carlyles were already seated, as if punctuality itself had been something they had beaten us to. Richard stood when he saw me, tall, broad, silver at the temples, and took my hand with both of his. It was the kind of handshake that did not greet you as much as test how much space you were willing to surrender. Candy stayed in her chair and offered Evelyn 3 fingers across the table, forcing my wife to lean over the bread plates to reach her. Evan hugged Leah and whispered something that made her smile. And for 1 second I thought maybe I had misread the air. Then the waiter came. Richard took the wine list before anyone else touched it. "Do you folks drink red?" he asked. Not what we liked, not whether we wanted any, just whether we qualified, I said occasionally. He nodded like I had passed a small exam and ordered for the table. For a while, it was ordinary. Traffic downtown, the Colts, a road project on I-465 everyone complained about because complaining about roads is the safest language in Indiana. Then Richard turned to me. So, Tom, what line of work are you in? Mostly industrial businesses, I said. Manufacturing interests, some distribution. Consulting, he asked. Not exactly. He smiled, settled back, and I watched him place me in a drawer. Got it. Small operation, Evelyn said. Tom is being modest. Richard tapped the table twice. Nothing wrong with staying manageable. Then he began explaining Harrison Vale to the man who owned it. Candy turned to Evelyn after the sip of wine, with the soft smile people use when they are already certain they are being kind. Tom said you were in education. I was a principal, Evelyn said. 27 years. Oh, Candy said. In the city schools. The way she said city made it sound less like a place and more like a condition. Evelyn nodded. Yes, that must have been demanding, Candy said. Then she tilted her head. Have you always lived around Indianapolis? All my life. No. I mean, before that. Evelyn looked at her for one full second before being born. Candy laughed too quickly. Like the room had rescued her. I felt my hand tighten around the glass. My wife had been insulted politely, and I had said nothing. The salads came down, and Richard found the wedding as if he had been waiting for a softer weapon. He said he and Candy understood these things could get expensive. He said they were prepared to carry the heavier side. I thanked him because that was the polite door he had opened. Then he kept walking through it. We don't want anyone putting themselves in a hole over one day, he said. Leah's hand went flat beside her water glass. Candy asked about the guest list. Evelyn said we were thinking around 60 from our side. Mostly family. Old friends. A few people Leah had grown up around. Oh, local people, Candy said, relieved. Like that solved a problem none of us knew we had. Richard turned his attention to my watch. Evelyn had given it to me for our 30th anniversary. A plain steel thing I wore because her hands had closed the clasp the first time. Richard leaned close and smiled. They make some frighteningly good copies now, he said. A buddy of mine brought one back from overseas. Couldn't tell it from the real thing. I've heard that, I said. Across from me, Leah shrank without moving. That is hard to explain unless you have seen it happen to your own child. Her shoulders stayed straight. Her face stayed pleasant, but something in her pulled back from the table. Richard went on about venues, deposits, what people expected now, how important it was not to overreach. Then he praised Leah for being so grounded, so articulate, and the kind of girl who earned what she had. He said all of it to me, not to her. Evan stared at his plate, pushed one piece of lettuce in a circle, and let his father keep talking. The main course came, and I felt Leah look at me before I looked at her. That was our signal. After the plates, after people had eaten, I was supposed to tell Richard Carlisle that Harrison Vale was not just a company I knew about. It was mine. I set my fork down and reached for the sentence. Richard got there first. So, Tom, he said, wiping his mouth, where did you go to college? I told him the truth. 2 years at Ivy Tech, night classes whenever I could afford them, while I worked days in a machine shop. He nodded. Good for you. 3 words can weigh more than a paragraph when a man knows exactly where he thinks you belong. Then he leaned back, one arm over the empty chair beside him, and said, Look, down the road. If the kids need help, a house, medical bills, whatever comes up, Candy and I are in a position to carry that. You don't need to stretch yourself trying to keep up. Nobody at that table breathed after that. He had told me, at my daughter's engagement dinner, that he would take care of my child because I could not. I looked at Leah. She looked back and moved her head no. Barely half an inch. That was the plan disappearing. So I swallowed the sentence that would have ended Richard's night and said, That's generous of you. He smiled. We take care of family. When the check came, I took it. Richard objected twice. Then, let me pay. $428. I folded the receipt, put it in my jacket pocket, and kept the truth there with it. The drive home took 14 minutes, and Evelyn did not speak for the first 10. Indianapolis slid past the windows in strips of orange light and black glass, and I kept both hands on the wheel like the road required all of me. Finally, she said, I have never felt smaller beside you. That hurt worse than anything Richard had said. I know. I told her. No, she said. You saw it. That is different. I had no defense. I could have ended that dinner with one sentence. Instead, I had treated my silence like wisdom and made my wife sit inside it. When we pulled into the garage, Evelyn stayed in the car. "Tom, you have mistaken endurance for character for a very long time." Then she went inside. Leah did not call me the next day. Or the next. For 6 days, I checked my phone like a man pretending not to wait. Evelyn told me to leave her alone, so I did. When Leah finally called, her voice was rough. "I'm sorry, Dad." "For what?" "For watching them do it to you and Mom. For sitting there and learning how easy it is to disappear." I said she had been under the table with us, not above it. She was quiet. Then she said, "I'm not sure that makes it better." I did not answer that. Leah met Evan the next afternoon at his apartment. She did not cry when she told him what his parents had done. That was how I knew she had already cried somewhere else. She repeated the words calmly. "City schools? Comfortable contributing? Good for you. Stretch yourself trying to keep up." Evan rubbed both hands over his face. "I know," he said. "I heard it." "Then, why didn't you say anything?" He looked at the floor. "That's just how my dad is." Leah waited. Evan added, "If you make every comment a battle, you'll spend your whole life fighting." And that was when she understood. He wasn't warning her. He was training her. Leah did not break off the engagement that afternoon. That would have made the story cleaner. But my daughter has never trusted a feeling just because it arrived loudly. She took 9 days. During those 9 days, she made a list on the back pages of a work notebook. Not accusations, moments. Candy asking whether Leah's apartment was safe enough for a girl alone. Richard calling her surprisingly confident after a presentation. Candy touching Leah's hair at lunch and saying it had so much personality. Evan laughing. Not because he thought it was funny, but because laughter moved the room forward. That was the part that hurt her most. Not one comment had seemed worth a fight when it happened. Each one had been small enough to swallow. Each one came wrapped in a smile, a compliment, or a concern that could be defended later. But, written together, they stopped looking like misunderstandings and started looking like weather. Evan had been there for 3 of the 4 moments. Every time. He had done the same thing, changed the subject, looked down, made peace with silence, and called it maturity. Leah told me later that one bad dinner could be explained away. 4 moments could not. A pattern was not history. A pattern was a forecast. And once she saw the forecast, she could no longer pretend she did not know what kind of life she was being asked to enter. Monday evening, Leah drove to Evan's apartment with the ring in her coat pocket. He opened the door smiling. Then saw her face and stopped. She placed the box in his hand. "I can't marry into a family that looks at my mother like she is furniture," she said. "And I can't marry a man who heard it happen and chose his plate." Evan whispered her name. Leah waited for courage to arrive in him. It never did. She left. There is something about Leah that Richard Carlyle did not know. And I need it understood before anyone calls this a rich man's daughter getting protected. Leah was not placed at Harrison Vale. She was not introduced around the building by my name. She did not arrive with a title waiting. When she was 23, fresh out of college with a supply chain degree, she applied online like everybody else. Her legal name was Leah Monroe. Her mother's last name. The name printed on her diploma and tax forms. The application went through the same portal, the same screening, the same tired human resources software that rejected good people every day for reasons nobody can explain. The job was materials coordinator. $52,500 a year. Beige cubicle. No reserved parking. No office. No hint that the man who owned the holding company had seen her baby pictures. Only one person knew. Rebecca Sloan, Harrison Vale's CEO, knew because I told her before Leah interviewed. I told Rebecca one thing clearly. If Leah was not good enough, manage her out like anyone else. Do not call me first. Do not soften it. Do not protect her from consequence. Rebecca looked at me for a moment and said, "And if she is good, then you will find out the same way you find out about everybody else," I said. For 5 years, that was the arrangement. Leah earned reviews from people who did not know who her father was. Whatever she built in that building, she built without my shadow standing over it. Leah proved herself the way good people usually do. Not with speeches, but by being annoyed at a problem everyone else had learned to step around. In her 3rd year, actuator scrap started climbing. Quality blamed operators, operations blamed incoming parts. Purchasing blamed the supplier. The reports all sounded reasonable, which is how bad systems survive. Leah went to receiving at 6:30 on a Tuesday morning and watched a man named Dale inspect castings off a skid. He pulled one part out of every 40. Leah asked why. He pointed at the screen. She pulled the supplier agreement nobody opened and found the required sample was 1 in 10. A migration error had sat there for 4 years. By noon, she had screenshots. By Friday, she had an 11-page report with contract language, scrap history, inventory exposure, and corrective action. The number was $684,000 in suspect material. Rebecca brought it to me during a monthly review as a good news item about a sharp planner in supply chain. I sat there with my hands folded while a CEO praised my daughter to my face. And nobody in that room knew why it almost broke me. Evan Carlisle worked 1 row over from Leah, same band, same pay grade. Close enough that their first real conversation had been about a late supplier and a broken coffee machine. I liked him. He was polite in the unshowy way. He listened when Evelyn talked about schools. He asked me about machine shops and did not pretend to know more than he did. That mattered, because I do not want you thinking he was a fool or a snake from the beginning. He was neither. 6 weeks after the engagement, Evan was promoted to Continuous Improvement Manager, a position Harrison Vale had not had in January and somehow needed by March. Leah called me that night happy for him, and I asked one question: was Richard involved? He recused himself. She said. I said, good, and I meant it. At my level, a promotion like that should never reach me. Harrison Vale had 280 people. I owned the company. But I did not approve manager titles 4 layers below the CEO. Richard Carlisle, though, lived inside that building like it had grown around him. 24 years. Started as a production supervisor. Rose through operations. He knew the cycle time on machines most executives could not find on a map. He made money, owned a lake house, talked about his boat too early, and believed every inch of his life had been earned cleanly. That belief was the foundation everything else was built on. My father's name was Samuel Calloway, and he ran a horizontal boring mill for 34 years in a plant south of Fort Wayne that smelled like cutting oil even from the parking lot. He left for work before sunrise and came home with steel dust in the lines of his hands. When I was a boy, I thought all fathers had hands like that, dark in the creases no matter how hard they scrubbed. He was the best machinist in that building. Men said it when they needed something fixed. Foremen said it when a job was already late. But in 34 years, nobody once asked Samuel Calloway how the place should be run. Decisions came from clean shirts behind glass, and my father stood on concrete making those decisions possible. That is where my patience came from, not virtue. Inheritance. I bought my first machine shop in 1994. 12 employees, 2 old mills, 1 customer who paid whenever his conscience woke up, and a roof that leaked into 3 buckets every time it rained. 4 banks turned me down. The 4th loan officer stared at my projections for half an hour, found nothing wrong, then said the program was designed for people with more industry experience. I had 11 years on shop floors by then. He smiled like experience only counted if a man like him recognized it. The 5th bank said yes. A woman named Dolores Kent read every page twice and asked me why I had underestimated roof repairs. She was right. I followed her through 3 branches and 19 years. My father came to see the shop once. On a Saturday that October, he walked the floor with his hands clasped behind his back, stopping at each machine long enough to make my men nervous. He did not say he was proud. He did not say I had done well. At the Bridgeport, he put 2 fingers on the table, moved it an inch, and said, "Ways need scraping." I said, "I know." He nodded. "Then fix it." That was the whole blessing. I had the machine scraped the next month, even though we barely used it. I never told anyone why. Some sons framed diplomas. I fixed a mill. After my father died, Evelyn and I cleaned out his apartment on a Saturday while Leah was small enough to sleep in a car seat. There was a coffee can on the top shelf of his closet, behind winter hats. Inside were discharge papers, my mother's death certificate, a set of feeler gauges wrapped in cloth, and 1 envelope. Harrison Vale Controls, 1978. 4 sentences. Thank you for your interest. Another candidate more closely matched their requirements. They would keep his application on file. My father had kept that letter for 19 years. I read it sitting on his bedroom floor, realizing the company that had never seen him had left a wound he never named. I did not buy Harrison Vale to settle my father's account. That would make a cleaner story, but men like me know clean stories are lies with the corners sanded off. I bought it because the owner was old. The children wanted cash instead of machines. The margins were better than the market believed. And North Star could fix the capital backlog. 4 weeks into diligence, I found the old company history in a data room. Harrison Vale, same name, same plant, Same address printed on my father's rejection letter. I sat alone at a conference table and stared at that line until the screen dimmed. I signed the deal anyway. For 2 years. I told no one, not Evelyn, not Rebecca. I owned the place that had once looked past my father. 3 weeks after Barton and Ash, I sat in North Star's conference room for the quarterly review and watched numbers move across a screen. Castings were flat. Distribution was up. Harrison Vale's actuator backlog looked better than expected. Then, Rebecca Sloan got to salaried turnover, 18.7%, climbing for the 3rd straight year. Normally, someone would have blamed the labor market, said people were restless, and we would have moved to the next slide. I almost did. Then, I thought about Leah's hand going flat beside her water glass. I thought about Richard explaining my company to me like he had invented work itself. I did not ask about Richard Carlisle. I asked, how are promotions actually approved in operations? Rebecca looked up. Meaning who nominates? Who reviews the slate? Who checks for conflicts? And whether anyone outside the reporting chain sees a candidate before the title changes. The room went quiet in that careful executive way, where everyone suddenly discovers their pens. Rebecca said she would pull the process and come back to me. 9 days later, she came to my office instead of calling. Rebecca did not do that unless something was wrong. She sat down and said, "Before I start, I need you to know I'm angry." At who? At the system, she said. And at myself. Then she opened a folder and showed me there was no promotion process in operations at all. Rebecca's first review found 15 people hired into Richard Carlisle's organization over 10 years who were related to him. Candy, close friends, or people whose connections were obvious enough that a disclosure form should have existed. 2 nephews, Candy's cousin, a neighbor's son, a man from Richard's church softball team, Evan. Some were good employees. One of Richard's nephews had the best safety record on second shift, and truth matters even when it complicates revenge. The issue was not that every connected person was useless. The issue was that Richard had built a private door into a public process and acted offended when anyone noticed the hinges. There were 0 disclosure forms. Evan's promotion was worse. The continuous improvement manager role had been created by a director who reported to Richard. It was posted internally for 4 business days, the minimum, during the week before Memorial Day. 2 people applied, Evan Carlisle and Marisol Vega. Marisol had been at Harrison Vale 10 years, top review band 5 times. Lean Six Sigma black belt. 2 documented process improvements worth $170,000 a year. She had applied for 5 promotions and been told 3 times that she needed broader leadership exposure. The phrase was copied across reviews. I read her file at my kitchen table on a Sunday morning and had to stand up halfway through. Broader exposure is not something a person can manufacture alone. It is something a leader gives or withholds. Richard had withheld it, then promoted his son into a job Marisol was already qualified to do. For the first time, I was not angry about the dinner. I was angry that it had taken the dinner for me to look hard. Then Rebecca reached the vendor file. Midwest Precision Fabrication had supplied Harrison Vale with brackets, weldments, and small assemblies for 6 years. Total spend $4.7 million. There was not one competitive bid in the record. Every purchase order sat just below the amount that would have forced a second signature, which meant Richard's organization could approve them without daylight. On paper, Midwest looked ordinary. In the ownership documents, it was not. 55% belonged to Candy Carlisle's older brother. Richard had signed Harrison Vale's conflict of interest policy 3 separate times. No disclosure existed. Nepotism was ugly. But this was different. This was company money quietly becoming family money. And nobody in leadership had bothered to ask. For the next 4 months, I did nothing about Richard Carlisle. I did not call Rebecca for updates. I did not ask counsel what they had found. I did not send one email with a careful question hidden inside it. I ran North Star, refinanced the Kentucky distributor, approved a new machining cell in Ohio, and stayed away from Harrison Vale's investigation not one single time. That was the only way it could matter, if I touched it. Even once, every fact would shrink into gossip. The owner's daughter had a bad dinner. The owner got offended. A senior vice president lost his job. Marisol's 10 years would disappear under that story. I will not pretend I was noble. I hoped the audit found Richard. I just made sure it did not find him because of me. They terminated Richard Carlisle for cause on a Tuesday morning. I was not in the room. Rebecca handled it with Nelson Graves from Human Resources and outside counsel on the phone. Exactly how it should have been done. The meeting lasted 43 minutes. For the first 30, Richard explained. He explained that Midwest Precision was reliable. He explained everyone knew Candy's brother owned part of it. He explained the hiring policy had always been flexible in operations. He explained Evan had earned his promotion. That Richard had recused himself. That no one had ever questioned his judgment in 24 years. Then Rebecca slid the approval chain across the table. His signature was on Evan's compensation band. Nelson told me later that Richard stopped talking for the first time then. He asked for water, drank half of it, and set the cup down with both hands. Finally, he said, "Who authorized this?" Rebecca said. "I did." "No," Richard said. "Who owns North Star?" Rebecca looked at him for a moment. "Thomas Calloway." Nelson said there were 4 seconds of silence. Not dramatic silence. Real silence. The kind a man falls into when an old room rearranges itself around him. Richard repeated my name once. Thomas Calloway. Then his face changed. "Leah's father," Rebecca said. "Yes. I am glad I was not there. If I had been, the moment would have belonged to me. It was better this way." Richard had to sit alone with the memory of explaining my company to me. Richard did not just lose a title. A for-cause termination canceled every unvested incentive unit he had been counting on, roughly $485,000 on paper. His executive health supplement ended. His company car went back. The 18-month non-compete he had signed years earlier became enforceable precisely because he had taken the money attached to it. Counsel handled that. Rebecca enforced it. I did not add a word. At 61, with 24 years at one plant and a termination file that said, "Conflict of interest and policy violation," Richard suddenly discovered how small an industry becomes when a man can no longer introduce himself by his title alone anywhere. Evan's new title disappeared the same way it had arrived. Through a review he did not control, Rebecca's team reran the requisition, interviewed department heads, studied workload, and reached the plain conclusion nobody had wanted. In March, Harrison Vale did not need a continuous improvement manager. It needed a fair process. Evan was offered his former senior planner role. Same band, same desk row, same pay he had before the shortcut. He resigned 4 days later. To his credit, he worked the 2 weeks and left quietly. He did not come near Leah. Marisol Vega was called in April. Rebecca offered her the role she should have been considered for, honestly, the first time. Marisol said no. Politely. I respected that more than if she had rushed back grateful 6 months later. She called Rebecca herself. She returned as a senior planner, then became director within 3 years. I have never met her. When Leah's identity got out, it did not make her powerful. It made her suspicious. By Friday, people who had eaten lunch with her for years were rereading every promotion, every training slot, every time she had pushed back on a schedule and won. Nothing about her changed, but the story around her did. A man she had personally trained muttered near the copier that it explained a lot. Leah heard him. She did not answer. She did not transfer. She went back to her desk, opened the same build schedule she had managed before anyone knew my name, and kept working. 2 days later, a second shift scheduler named Bernice stopped beside her cubicle. Bernice was 56. 22 years in that building, not sentimental about anyone, she said. "I watched you catch the casting defect. That was all." Then, she walked away. Leah told me later that one sentence carried her through the worst month. Not praise, witness. There is a difference. Evan came back 4 times. The first was a letter. 4 pages, left in Leah's mailbox 2 weeks after she returned the ring. She read it at our kitchen table, folded it carefully, and did not answer. The second was in December, before the audit. Evan waited outside her apartment and told her he had confronted his father. Richard had looked confused and said he thought the evening had gone well. Leah told me that was when she understood the depth of it. Richard had not been pretending. He simply had not seen himself. The third time came after the termination. Evan was angry then, embarrassed, grieving a version of his father he still wanted to defend. He said things about North Star and about me that Leah never repeated. And I never asked. The fourth time was almost a year after the dinner. He asked for coffee, and she went. He looked thinner, older in the face. He told her he had replayed those 12 seconds after Richard talked over her. The moment when the whole table seemed to wait for him. He said he had been trained since childhood to disappear when his father filled a room. "That explains what I did," he told her. It doesn't excuse it, Leah believed him. That made it hurt. She told me later it was a real apology, maybe the first real one he had ever given, but she still said no. I believe you're changing, she said. I just won't make my life the classroom where you learn to become brave. There was a folder in the lower drawer of my office credenza with Leah's name on the tab. I had put it there before Barton and Ash and told only Evelyn. Leah found it in March while helping me pull tax documents. And because her name was printed on the label, she opened it. Inside was a purchase agreement for a house in Carmel. Already closed, held in trust. Possession scheduled for 2 weeks after the wedding. 2 keys were taped inside an envelope. The title company had written, Leah Carlisle on the cardboard tag, a name my daughter would never use. Behind that was a bill of sale for a new SUV and a 10-day honeymoon itinerary through Madrid, Seville, and Granada, with both their names printed in blue ink. She sat on my office floor holding those keys for 20 minutes. Then she started crying, not because she wanted the house, not because she missed the car or Spain. She was mourning a future that had been built quietly, carefully, and was already dead. Finally, she whispered. They thought you had nothing, I said. They thought what they needed to think. I sold the Carmel house 11 months later. I told myself I was pleased because I did not lose money, which was a ridiculous thing to take comfort in, but I took it anyway. The Spain trip I did not cancel. Evelyn and I went in June, 10 days through Madrid, Seville, and Granada. The first trip we had taken alone in almost a decade. On the 4th morning, we were sitting outside a cafe in Seville, and Evelyn looked over her coffee and said, I'm glad we found out before the wedding. I said, so am I. Then she added, and I'm glad Leah learned faster than both of us. That landed harder. Later that night, walking back through a narrow street, she said I had spent so many years being reasonable that she could no longer tell when I was choosing peace and when enduring insult. About a year later, I found the receipt from Barton and Ash folded inside the jacket I had worn. $428. My father had kept Harrison Vale's rejection letter in a coffee can for 19 years. I had kept a dinner check without knowing why. You can own the building and still carry paper in your pocket, waiting for someone to ask you to prove the wound was real. Leah is 34 now, and she works at Harrison Vale. 6 years after that dinner, she runs the actuator division, $195 million in annual revenue, 410 people, and enough moving parts to ruin a week before most executives finish coffee. Rebecca chose her over 2 other candidates, I found out during a monthly review. The same way I found out about the casting defect, sitting quietly while someone praised my daughter without needing me in the sentence. One Saturday, I walked the plant with her while second shift was running. No meeting, no announcement, just steel, coolant, forklifts, and the low thunder of machines doing work people never understand. We stopped at a horizontal boring mill, and I told her about Samuel Calloway, not the rejection letter, not yet, just his hands, the 34 years, and the way he could hear a bad cut before anyone else saw it. Leah touched the safety rail and asked, would he have liked this place? He would have found 5 things wrong in 20 minutes, I said. She smiled. Would he have told you all 5? No, I said, only 4. He'd make you find the last one. A man came past with a pallet jack and nodded at her. Morning, Miss Monroe. Morning, Luis, she said. He did not look at me. He had no reason to. On the way out, Leah straightened a crooked notice on the time clock board without breaking stride. My father used to do that, I never told her. Evelyn asked me whether I regretted the rule. Not Richard, not the dinner, not the investigation. She meant Leah. 28 years of refusing to hand our daughter a door with my name printed on it. We were sitting on's back porch. Late summer, the kind of Indiana evening where the heat finally gives up after sunset. I told her no. Then I thought about the folder in my office. The house in Carmel. The keys Leah held. And I corrected myself, not exactly. Because the truth is, I had not refused Leah help. I had refused her unearned identity. There is a difference. The house was meant to be a gift after she had already learned who she was without it. If I had handed her everything at 22, I would have stolen the best evidence she would ever have about herself. Richard Carlisle never understood that. He believed in merit the way some men believe in weather loudly, generally. Until it inconveniences them. He could say Leah earned everything while creating a job for Evan in the same breath, because in his mind, those facts lived in separate rooms with no hallway between them. That was not strategy. It was blindness. His life had taught him to see favors given to him as judgment. And favors denied to others as standards. A man can build a career on that, if nobody asks the right question. Everything that ruined Richard Carlisle had been sitting inside Harrison Vale before I ever asked a question. 15 personnel files. $4.7 million in purchase orders. Empty disclosure folders. Copied review language. A promotion role created just long enough to fit one man's son. I did not invent evidence. I did not build a trap. I only asked how a process worked, and the truth answered louder than I ever could have. That is what men like Richard survive on, nobody being curious enough. My father once applied to that same company and received 4 sentences back. My daughter started there at $52,500 a year under a name nobody recognized. And now she runs a division men like Richard used to control. Evan apologized properly. Leah believed him. She still said no. So tell me honestly, when a man finally understands the damage after the damage is done, does she owe him another chance?